should we even like be interested in Enochian magic? Which is, it seems like an obvious question, but it is fairly significant. Enochian magic was the product of the work between John Dee and Edward Kelly, and of which one of them is very well credited, and the other is kind of very disgraced, really, in the historical record, which is fair enough, but not really. The reasons that people don't like Kelly aren't the reasons that they shouldn't like Kelly. He was a sketchy character, totally sketchy. Actually, it's not even really clear if Edward Kelly was his real name. So, whatever. But at the same time, the idea, and just to get this out of the way, because this, certain people is this big debate as oh, was Kelly fooling Dee and blah blah blah. It's not a debate. If you read the actual material, it's not a debate. Because Kelly was constantly saying that the angels were fucked. He thought they were really demons. He was trying to get away from them. He was trying to get away from Dee. He didn't like the whole fucking situation. So that's not something you do when you're trying to swindle someone out of their money. It doesn't really make sense. So let's be done with that. Enochian magic precipitated Aleister Crowley's sort of HGA experience and his revelation of the Book of the Law and Thelema. And if we look at the Enochian record, essentially what we're seeing is a system of magic, which is, it's not the only thing it does, but it's sort of precipitated on initiating the apocalypse, as it's foretold in the Book of Revelations and so on and so forth. So it's very significant that in the Book of the Law, Crowley says, I am the great beast 666, and well, Crowley doesn't say this, sorry, Aiwass says this, and he calls him the beast 666. So, you got a beast, that's part of the apocalypse. Later on, you get horsemen, you get a final conflict, you get a second coming, you get all those things, and they all have to be part of the same system. There's no way to have the great beast and the Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, and then not have all the rest of that shit happen after. They're all part of the same equation. So the reason that Enochian magic is significant in that respect is it sort of belongs to a school of thought that we call eschatology or teleology, thinking of the end point of a thing. The end point of a thing is what gives it its essence and its significance. So if Revelations actually makes any sense for anything, and I'm not here saying there's going to be this final conflict with dragons and crap. I don't really think so. But the idea that the direction that everything is going has the significance, the weight of the universe, or the gravity of destiny, however you want to put it behind it, that's sort of why Enochian magic is significant. It's also significant because before this system existed, there was a shitload of different grimoire systems, and none of them really agreed with each other. There's always different spellings for different angel names, different spellings for different demon names. If you're really taking this seriously and you're trying to do it practically, it makes it very difficult to know exactly what's the right name or the right way to go about it, because all these rituals are kind of built around the names of the spirits. So Enochian magic was a way of just kind of revolutionizing all this, and I think it was the angel Ave, when he's talking to Dee, who says specifically, don't worry about the rest of this stuff. They all played at this. This was just a game to them. This is it was a ratification of pre-existing grimoire magic, but it happens along the same lines as grimoire magic. So it's still hierarchical, and it still follows a specific structure, except that the problem is that Dee and Kelly never really made that structure explicit in what we have. Which brings us to the number one problem with this and what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to get a little more into the history of Dee and Kelly and stuff like that later. I want to talk first and foremost about practical application of the Enochian system and how we use it. And yeah, the history is important, and it's important to know because that's how we know that they weren't bullshitting us, basically. But at the same time, it's that's just like telling stories, and it is stuff that can be found fairly easily in any basic book on Enochian magic. But the role of the hierarchy and taking the spirits in order and so on and so forth, this comes from all the old grimoire books, which sort of, like I said, don't agree, don't come together or whatever. To be specific about the role of Kelly, basically for anyone who doesn't know, essentially what happened was John Dee would pray and pray and pray, and Edward Kelly would see images of spirits in the crystals, and they'd show him particular things, or they'd point out particular things and give him symbols and whatever, and he would record that. Aleister Crowley, who I mentioned before, is like basically the person who used this system the most effectively of anyone we have a record of. He kind of like, he identified with Edward Kelly. He actually believes himself to be the reincarnation of Edward Kelly, which is kind of significant because we don't, like, Kelly's the one that we don't know anything about, right? So that he would identify with Kelly is odd, but I think the reason that he did that, and the reason that we should pay attention to that, is because Kelly was very credulous of the spirits. He never just accepted what he was being told. He always, he had questions, he had demands. There's one point in the record where the spirits are telling him they have all this power to do all this shit, and he's like, well, give me 100 pounds. Like, make with the money. It's like, if you're so powerful, like, just give me some money right now. And, yeah, and there's times later that they give him all these attributions to different, for the governors of the Aethers to different areas, and then he looks it up later and finds out that Agrippa has exactly the same attributions in one of his books, and he's like, what the fuck, this is just from this other book, except he's the one who recorded it. So, yeah, that's a little bit weird. But he's questioning. And this was one of the significant things in Aleister Crowley's career. When he's looking back on shit, he often says that one of his big problems was when spirits told him to do things, he didn't just do them. He was always like, well, why should I? What can I do? I don't have the money. I don't feel like going to fucking Rome right now, or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, whatever it was. But at the same time, the whole spirit of Crowley's school of thought is you should have these questions, and you shouldn't be too credulous. So, Dee and Kelly's career and Crowley's career draw this line which no one ever falls on the right side of all the time, but it's something that everyone who practices ceremonial magic should be conscious of. It's very important to be conscious of, and there's no way to be right about it all the time, but you should be aware of at what point you're questioning too much and at what point you're believing too much. Because both of those things are an issue. And there is no easy way out of that equation. That's a balancing act. That has to happen, and like I said, no one ever gets it right all the time. Kelly also had issues when he started practicing ceremonial magic on his own without Dee, because then he started getting messages that totally contradicted his culture, his situation. Stuff like Jesus Christ is not to be worshipped as God, there are as many people on the earth as there ever have been, and there will never be more or less, and so on and so forth. Things that, yeah, and a lot of authors have made like a big issue of this. Like Tyson talks about this a lot, Jeffrey James talks about this a lot, and at the same time, Crowley mentions it as well, but when he mentions it as the actual point of the whole thing. Like, he really emphasizes it, where everyone else kind of says, like, this is where Kelly fucked up because he was doing shit without Dee. Crowley's kind of like, no, this is where Kelly was getting it right because Dee wasn't interfering. And that's interesting in and of itself. And I don't want to tell people necessarily what to think that, and they can look up the specifics, but it's, what I'm trying to highlight here are the things to grapple with. The problems. What do we face? So, and just briefly getting this out of the way, what I'm going to get into is like how to practically work the system, but at the same time, I'm not trying to say that Dee and Kelly didn't have a practical way to work the system. They probably did. It's just the fact that all we have of them is a couple of books that people found later, years after Dee was dead. So the full extent of the record, meh. Like, maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't. Maybe there was a shitload more books, maybe there weren't. Maybe this is actually all there was, and maybe there was a lot more. There's no way of saying, really. So, essentially, what you have is you have the Watchtowers, the Aethers, and the Angels of Time, which are the ones that come up in the 5 books of mystery, which the Golden Dawn didn't deal with. And the reason that I mention the Golden Dawn in this respect is they're kind of the first occult group to try to come up with a system for working this kind of magic. And they came up with a fairly elaborate system that sort of became the standard for working this kind of magic afterward. And it gets confusing when people realize that, like, no, like, pretty much everything that they put onto it was added on based on their understanding of this through Eliphas Levi and people like that. So basically what you have is you have the 4 Watchtowers, which stand in the 4 corners, and they're meant to represent the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And essentially, like, in order to initiate the apocalypse, you activate different parts of the Watchtowers. So activating them is essentially vibrating